to know that like you can't keep doing the same things.
8 days before the biggest game of his life, a felony arrest shattered Patrick Mahomes' world. For a full year, he maintained a public wall of silence. But then the cameras rolled and the wall came crumbling down. The confession that followed would redefine the entire narrative. It happened on the August 20th, 2025 episode of ESPN's Chiefs Kingdom. The series was a 6-part documentary, an intimate look inside the Kansas City Chiefs dynasty. In it, Patrick Mahomes finally confronted the one topic he had fiercely guarded from the public eye for more than a year. He spoke about his father's arrest, the personal toll it took on him, and the brutal wake-up call he believed it delivered to his dad. I think just knowing that it hurt me woke him up to know that, like, you can't keep doing the same things. In that same episode, his father, Pat Mahomes Sr., offered his own raw account, describing the agony of watching his son deflect questions meant for him. It was a burden his son carried at a Super Bowl press conference. I called him, right after, and told him, I said, I'm sorry that it's taken away from your time and focus. I made a vow that he would never have to deal with anything because of drinking, because of me. Brittany Mahomes confirmed the shift, explaining that this time was different. The incident finally landed with Pat Sr. with a force nothing else ever had. The reason his children and his grandchildren were watching his every move. These three perspectives from Patrick, his father, and his wife formed the emotional core of this entire saga. But to truly grasp the weight of their words, you have to go back to the moment it all began, to the events of February 2024 that set this painful reckoning in motion. It started on February 3rd, 2024. On a stretch of West Gentry Parkway in Tyler, Texas, around 8:30 at night, Pat Mahomes Sr. was stopped by police. Inside the vehicle, officers discovered an open can of beer. At the scene, Sr. failed the field sobriety tests. A blood alcohol test confirmed their suspicions, revealing a level of 0.23, nearly 3 times the legal limit of 0.08. This wasn't his first offense. With prior DWI convictions on his record, Texas law classified this arrest as a third-degree felony. The charge was DWI third offense or more, and it carried a devastating potential penalty: 2 to 10 years in a state prison and a fine up to $10,000. The date of the arrest was February 3rd, 2024. The Super Bowl was scheduled for February 11th, 2024. 8 days. That was the gap between a felony charge and the most important game of his son's career. The Kansas City Chiefs were on the verge of history, hunting for a third straight Super Bowl victory, a feat unheard of in the modern NFL. And at the center of it all was Patrick Mahomes. At just 28 years old, with 2 championships already to his name, every camera in the sports world was trained on him. Then the story broke. His father's mugshot flooded the news cycle, and reporters shoved the scandal in his face at the Super Bowl press conferences before a single down was played. He had come to discuss the formidable 49ers. Instead, he found himself answering for a felony. On February 6, 2024, Patrick gave his only public response to Page 6, stating, "It's a family matter, so I will just keep it to the family." That's all I really have to say at this point. The words were brief, controlled. A wall had been erected, and 8 days later, behind that wall, he won the Super Bowl. Meanwhile, the legal battle unfolded on its own timeline. An indictment came for Pat Sr. in April of 2024. A jury trial was set for August 27, 2024. But on the very day the trial was meant to start, everything changed. He entered a guilty plea to the felony charge in Judge Carrie L. Russell's Smith County courtroom. Formal sentencing was handed down on September 23, 2024. The sentence included 5 years of probation with intense first-year supervision, 160 hours of community service enrollment in a DWI repeat offender program, a life skills course, AA classes, and a strict no alcohol mandate. A separate 10-day term in county jail was also imposed, which he began serving around October 21, 2024. Cameras from TMZ were there to capture the moment he reported to Smith County Jail to begin his time. A man who stared down a potential 2 to 10 years in prison walked away with probation and just 10 days in a county facility. That was the outcome. And that was what Patrick was forced to process. His public reaction was minimal, but his private one, captured on camera a year later, was raw and unfiltered. That authentic moment is the foundation for the rest of this story, Patrick's true feelings and their profound implications. The version of Patrick Mahomes' reaction that truly resonated, the one that was watched, shared and debated the most, didn't come from a sterile press conference or a prepared statement. It emerged from a private moment captured by a documentary crew that Patrick had only agreed to let in his life because of advice from none other than Peyton Manning. In an interview on CBS Mornings, Patrick revealed the thought process that led him to grant such unprecedented access. I talked to Peyton about it for a while, and I asked him, would he do it? And he kind of had said, maybe not at the beginning of my career, but I think what stuck with me is he said at the end of my career, I wish I would have done it so my kids could have seen what I was doing every day. It was that exact idea, creating a record of this chapter for his own children, that unexpectedly unlocked the door to the one conversation Patrick had kept private for over a year. His goal was never to issue a public statement about the DWI. It was simply to document who he was during this monumental phase of his life and career. The painful conversation about the arrest only surfaced because those cameras were always there, capturing the unguarded reality that the press conferences could never touch. The episode of Chiefs Kingdom that aired on August 20th, 2025 on ESPN Plus featured the interview that would become the defining clip of the entire ordeal. In it, Patrick finally articulated the crushing specific weight of the timing of an arrest that landed just 8 days before the Super Bowl. A private family wound was ripped open for the world to see, becoming just another question lobbed at him by reporters sandwiched between talk of the 49ers defense. But for him, that single realization that his actions had caused his son pain was the one thing that sliced through all the legal jargon and public debate that engulfed the scandal. Patrick wasn't looking at this like a legal analyst dissecting a policy decision. He wasn't there to debate if probation was the right call for a third felony offense. He was speaking as a son forced to face a barrage of cameras and answer for his father's drunk driving arrest, all while getting ready for the Super Bowl. The damage was emotional, not legal. And in that same episode, Pat Sr.'s reaction showed he finally understood the weight of that truth. He confessed that watching his son field questions about his mistakes in front of the entire sports world was the single most humiliating experience of his life. It wasn't the arrest. It wasn't the jail time. It wasn't the terms of his probation, the ankle monitor, or the hours of community service. It was the image of his son at the height of his career, in the middle of a dynasty chasing another championship, stuck at a podium facing the full force of the sports media. All of them pointing fingers, asking about a felony. The docuseries then revealed the true nature of their relationship behind the headlines. Pat Sr. was a constant presence there in the stands at Arrowhead, woven into the fabric of the family's daily life, just watching his son achieve greatness. He genuinely loves seeing his son play the game and fulfill his lifelong dream. Patrick himself said, "For him to be there and supporting me, that's really cool, because those moments are moments that you won't ever get again." And he's been there for all of them this last year. This revealed the complete emotional landscape of the situation. It wasn't a story of a son abandoning his father. There was no public shaming, no carefully crafted statement released through a publicist. It was simply a son admitting he was hurt, a father who listened and called to say he was sorry, and a family that continued to support one another from the stadium seats to the dinner table through it all. Brittany Mahomes offered another perspective, suggesting the real turning point for Pat Sr. came when he realized his children and grandchildren were watching it all unfold. This introduced a generational impact that no courtroom argument could ever have. Sterling Bronze and Golden 3 kids who would one day see the news clips and read the articles, forced to make sense of this difficult chapter in their family's story through their own eyes. That, according to Brittany, was the one thing that finally broke through his defenses when nothing else could. It wasn't the legal system or the threat of punishment. It was the thought of his grandchildren watching from their suite at Arrowhead. The 2025 Chiefs season brought a new kind of agony for Patrick. A torn ACL and LCL in Week 15 against the Chargers brought his year to an abrupt and painful end. Without him, the team stumbled to a 6-11 record, missing the playoffs for the first time in the Mahomes era. Surgery was a success, and the grueling rehab began without delay. By his press conference in January 2026, his entire focus had already shifted to his comeback. First off, rehab's going great so far," he stated. Just hitting all the checkpoints that the doctor wants you to do. And obviously, I think the long term, I want to be ready for week 1. Doctor said that I could be. When reporters questioned him about the immense mental toll of such a long and demanding recovery, he explained, but for me, I think just having that goal in mind of trying to get better every day, that as well as having a great wife that is able to keep me involved with the kids. This revealed the unwavering consistency in his character, no matter the crisis he faced. Be it a devastating injury, a family emergency, intense public scrutiny, or a press conference ambush. His response was always the same, disciplined and relentlessly forward-looking. Deal with it in private. Perform in public. Never stop moving forward. When Patrick finally addressed the situation head-on, his words weren't filled with anger. He didn't pass judgment on the court's ruling. He spoke as a son, explaining that the simple knowledge of his pain was the wake-up call his father needed. But was it truly a wake-up call? The next chapter of this story provides the sobering answer to that question. What happened in 2026? The story didn't conclude with the judge's sentence. Instead, it was reborn almost exactly 2 years after it first began. The 5-year probation handed down in September 2024 included a complex web of strict conditions: zero alcohol, intense supervision in the first year, attendance completed community service, and a Scram ankle monitor. This device, which continuously monitors for alcohol consumption, was mandated as part of his travel permissions and general oversight. But that monitor wasn't part of the original sentence. It was added later, a direct response to compliance issues that arose while he was already on probation. In February of 2025, Pat Sr. failed to take a court-mandated urine test on time, submitting his sample on February 12th, a day after the February 11th deadline. He passed the test, but the breach was noted. Later that month, reports surfaced of an altercation during a trip to New Orleans for Super Bowl weekend, a trip for which Pat Sr. had received the court's express permission. Court documents later hinted that the entire incident might have been a stunt for a boxing promotion that also involved former MLB pitcher John Rocker. But whether it was real or staged didn't matter. The sequence of events prompted his supervision officer and the DA to demand a Scram ankle bracelet as an added layer of monitoring. The court approved the request, ordering Pat Sr. to pay for it himself. And so by the close of 2025, Pat Mahomes Sr. was on active felony probation, with a device strapped to his ankle, tracking his alcohol consumption around the clock. He was under a system of supervision that had already documented at least one missed test and another incident connected to out-of-state travel. The net of supervision had drawn significantly tighter since September of 2024. Then came January 1st, 2026, New Year's Day. The Scram ankle monitor sent an alert. It had reportedly detected a significant level of alcohol, with some sources claiming a transdermal reading of approximately 0.045. A single alert from an ankle monitor, a silent digital pulse that automatically flagged a violation, was all it took to set the alarm screaming within the probation system. The system reacted with swift, unforgiving efficiency. On February 3rd, 2026, a date that echoed with haunting significance precisely 2 years after his original 2024 DWI arrest, the gears of justice began to grind again. During what should have been a routine probation meeting in Smith County, Pat Mahomes Sr. was taken into custody and booked into the local jail in Tyler. He would spend the next 35 days behind bars. District Attorney Jacob Putman went on record confirming the violation was for alleged alcohol consumption, a direct breach of the zero-tolerance terms of his probation. The chilling coincidence of the date February 3rd, separated by 2 years, was a detail every reporter seized upon. This bizarre symmetry made the 2026 arrest feel like a grim repeating chapter in a story that was becoming deeply uncomfortable. It was the same county, the same probation system, the same man 2 years down the road. Almost to the hour, he was now accused of violating felony probation in Texas, a charge made infinitely more serious because it was tied to a third DWI backed by a documented history of convictions. The potential fallout was catastrophic. A complete revocation of his probation, which would bring the original prison sentence roaring back to life, was now a terrifyingly real possibility. This meant Pat Sr. entered his March 9th revocation hearing staring down the barrel of up to 10 years in a state prison. That decade of lost time was on the table. The hearing convened on March 9, 2026, before the very same judge, Carrie L. Russell, who had handed down his original sentence in Smith County. But what unfolded in that courtroom sent the entire story careening in a new direction. A hair follicle test ordered for the hearing came back with a bombshell result completely clean. There was zero evidence of long-term alcohol use. Pat Sr. admitted nothing. The ankle monitor, however, had told a different story. The device had flagged him for alcohol, but the hair follicle test showed nothing. These two pieces of evidence stood in stark, irreconcilable conflict, and that conflict became the pivot point for the entire proceeding. The district attorney's office, facing this contradiction, filed a motion to withdraw their request to revoke his probation, though they weren't letting the matter go entirely. Instead, they pushed to modify his existing terms. Judge Russell approved the change. Pat Sr.'s probation was extended by 2 years, raising the total supervision period to 7 years, and a mandatory 16-week outpatient treatment program was added as a new requirement. He was given credit for the 30 days he'd already served since his arrest, which completely satisfied a new 30-day jail term component. He was released from custody that same day. He had walked into that courtroom facing 10 years in prison. He walked out with an extended probation and a mandate for treatment. The internet exploded immediately with a furious energy that felt identical to the outrage from 2024. The verdict was swift and damning celebrity justice. How many second chances does one person get? The conflicting reports, the ankle monitor's alert versus the clean hair test, fueled a ferocious new debate. Critics questioned if it was a simple technological glitch or the result of a high-powered attorney and the undeniable gravitational pull of a famous son's last name. Some experts noted that these skin-based monitors can on rare occasions produce false positives, triggered by incidental contact with alcohol from sources like hand sanitizer or cleaning products. Defenders of the outcome insisted the evidence just wasn't strong enough for a full revocation. There was no confession and no long-term use confirmed by the hair test. They argued that a treatment order addresses the core problem of addiction more effectively than sending a 55-year-old man to prison for a decade ever could. The debate raged on without resolution. It just reset the clock exactly as it had after the sentencing in 2024. Patrick Mahomes offered no public comment in response to the March 9th hearing. As of March 10, 2026, the day after the court's decision, his position remained unchanged. Absolute silence. No press conferences, no social media posts. The wall of silence remained, and at this point, that silence had become its own powerful statement. As of March 10, 2026, Pat Sr. remained a man on extended probation. His total term now stood at 7 years from the original sentence, with a 16-week outpatient program as a new condition and an ankle monitor that was likely adjusted after the hearing. No new incidents have been reported since his release, but the history was a shadow that no one could ignore. The 2024 arrest, after all, did not happen in a vacuum. It was simply the most visible moment in a destructive pattern that had been building for years. A private struggle that became national news only because of the stratospheric fame of Patrick Mahomes. Before 2024, Pat Mahomes Sr. already had at least 2 prior DWI-related convictions on his record, with court documents pointing to incidents as far back as 2008. A DWI in South Dakota from 2008 later surfaced in media reports. A 2016 charge for public intoxication was also recorded, an incident that notably took place at one of Patrick's college football games at Texas Tech. At the time, it barely caused a ripple. Patrick was not yet a household name. The most formally documented case before 2024 was a 2018 DWI arrest in Smith County, Texas, which led to a guilty plea and a 40-day jail sentence. He served that time on weekends, stretching from February 2019 to February 2020. This was officially his second offense. It was a standard sentence under Texas law for a DWI that did not result in any injuries. The penalties were minor. He just moved on. And that single fact is the key to understanding how everything spiraled out of control. Every single time, the fallout was something he could handle. A few weekends in jail, some mandatory classes, and then he was free. For a man sinking deeper into alcoholism, this revolving door of offense, punishment, and release never served as a wake-up call. Instead, it gave the destructive pattern permission to persist. But with the arrest in February 2024, prosecutors drew a line. They pointed directly to his history of convictions, escalating the charge to a third-degree felony, the gravest legal category his actions had ever triggered. The system had finally exhausted all its options for leniency. Pat Sr. himself would eventually look back at the origins of his struggle. In the ESPN docuseries Chief's Kingdom, he opened up about how deeply alcohol was embedded in his professional world right from the start. As he put it in his own words during the series, "I never really thought alcohol was a problem for me. It was just something that I've always done, just something that's in the game." That single statement was forged over an 11-year career in Major League Baseball. He took the mound for 6 different franchises: the Minnesota Twins, Boston Red Sox, New York Mets, Texas Rangers, Chicago Cubs, and Pittsburgh Pirates from 1992 to 2003, with a season in Japan for the Yokohama Bay Stars sandwiched in between. Back in the 1990s and early 2000s, the clubhouse culture in professional baseball was a world where heavy drinking after games wasn't just common, it was normalized, even expected, and almost never questioned. Pat Sr. was immersed in that environment for more than a decade during the most formative years of his adult life. When he finally hung up his cleats and returned to Tyler, Texas, the habit came right along with him. But now it existed without the rigid framework of a game schedule to contain it, and without the daily pressure of keeping a roster spot. He had built a career record of 42 wins and 39 losses, a 5.47 ERA, and 452 strikeouts across 709 innings and 308 appearances. He was the definition of a journeyman. He moved around. He found a way. He clung to the game into his late 30s, weathering the grind of independent leagues and minor league bus trips long after his time in the majors was over. A career like that defined by endless travel, perpetual uncertainty, and that relentless clubhouse culture forged a specific bond with alcohol, one that Pat Sr. would later admit he failed to truly confront until it was far too late. In that same Chief's Kingdom episode, his son Patrick connected these exact dots. He observed that his father never saw the alcohol as a true threat because he could always still perform on the baseball field, which meant it never directly cost him his career, so the issue never felt like a crisis. The damage was quiet, internal, and unfolding in slow motion. And each time the law intervened, the consequences were just light enough to prevent a single catastrophic moment from forcing him to stop. This was the complex family backdrop to the 2024 arrest. Almost in parallel, Patrick's brother Jackson Mahomes was navigating his own legal storm. Jackson faced aggravated sexual battery charges filed against him in 2023, which came from an incident at a restaurant in February of that year. Those felony charges were eventually pleaded down to misdemeanor battery in March 2024, resulting in 6 months of probation that included required alcohol and drug treatment. That legal battle was entirely separate from Pat Sr.'s driving while intoxicated situation. But in the court of public opinion, the two timelines merged into one single, overwhelming narrative about the Mahomes family name and the turmoil surrounding it. And while Patrick was on the field winning Super Bowls, he addressed his brother's situation with the media using the very same guarded language he reserved for his father's. Honestly, it's kind of a personal thing that I'm just kind of going to keep to myself. At the end of the day, I come here to play football and try to take care of my family at the same time. The wall he put up was identical every single time. But as the Chief's Kingdom docuseries would later reveal, behind that stoic defense, the immense pressure of it all. His father's arrests, his brother's legal battle, the endless press conference questions, and the intense public scrutiny on everyone connected to his name had been building inside Patrick in a way those brief statements never betrayed. The history, the years of repeat offences, a culture that excused the behaviour, and a family name under a microscope that magnified with every championship. That is what made the final sentence feel so explosive to the millions of people watching. And the fierce reaction when it finally came was fueled by everything that had been simmering just beneath the surface. It's why they called it insane. The sentence is the very heart of this story. Everything else, the family history, the critical timing, Patrick's disciplined silence all funnels into the outrage that was ignited by a single word: probation. Under Texas law, Pat Mahomes Sr. was facing a third-degree felony charge. For that offense, the punishment ranges from 2 to 10 years in state prison, plus a fine of up to $10,000. He had a clear documented history of prior DW1 convictions. His blood alcohol content at the moment of the arrest was 0.23, almost 3 times the legal limit. There was an open beer can in plain sight inside the car before any tests were even administered. On September 23, 2024, He was sentenced to 5 years of probation with intense supervision for the first year, 160 hours of community service, a mandatory DWI repeat offender program, a life skills course, AA classes, and a strict no alcohol condition. An additional 10-day county jail sentence was tacked on, which he served in late October of 2024. The sentence landed like a bomb, no prison, just a plea deal, community service, and an ankle monitor. The backlash was instantaneous. Online, the fury ignited, coalescing around a single explosive theory. Pat Mahomes Sr. walked because of his superstar son. One phrase, sharp and unforgiving, echoed through every comment thread. The entitlement is insane. Then came the fuel for the fire. A TMZ clip from the original 2024 arrest surfaced, allegedly showing the elder Mahomes dropping his son's name to the police. It was a move that the public saw as a blatant attempt to weaponize his son's celebrity against the law. That single moment crystallized the entire narrative of privilege. It wasn't just a story anymore. It was a scene, a visual that the public outrage could cling to. It transformed the case from a lenient sentence into the image of a man using his son's fame as a shield, just as the cuffs were coming out. As he started his 10-day jail sentence, the online verdict was already in that family is something else. The comments were brutal. The entitlement is unreal. Others lamented how a father and brother could tarnish a legacy. But one sentiment appeared more than any other. Poor Patrick. It's not his fault his dad is a piece of work. And that feeling highlighted the fundamental split in how everyone saw the story. On one side of the divide were those convinced the sentence was purely a product of fame. They argued that any ordinary person with the same criminal history, the same blood alcohol level, the same open container, and the same third offense felony charge would have been locked away without a moment's hesitation. On the other side were those who claimed Texas law often allows for deferred adjudication in non-injury felony. DWI cases suggesting this was standard procedure. They insisted plea bargains frequently result in similar outcomes no matter who the defendant is, and that the monitoring required programs, community service, and jail time were in fact real penalties. To them, blaming Patrick's fame was to assume a level of corruption that had no proof. His attorney, Joe Murphy, pushed back by pointing to his client's 6 months of sobriety and expressed remorse as key justifications for the plea arrangement. The entire defense strategy was built on the idea of recovery, not retribution. It was a narrative that often finds success in Texas courts for first-time offenders. But the public remained deeply unconvinced, pointing out this was his third strike, not his first. But it was the timing of it all that truly set the situation ablaze. In August of 2024, just weeks before his 10-day jail term, Pat Sr. made an Instagram post celebrating 6 months of being sober and thanking his family for their support. Then he checked into the county jail. To critics, the sequence of events felt scripted. The sobriety post was immediately dismissed as a hollow performance, a calculated PR move that was instantly undermined by the TMZ footage of him arriving at jail. The optics were terrible, creating a narrative that seemed almost too perfect. Announce your sobriety report to jail and walk free 10 days later. Yet underneath the public firestorm, the debates about privilege and the cries of entitlement, a deeper question remained, one that a documentary episode would answer far more powerfully than any court document. How did all of this truly affect his son Patrick? The answer was painfully simple. It wounded him, and for his father, knowing that, hearing it in his son's voice, feeling that pain and carrying that weight became the real punishment. A consequence far heavier than any jail cell, any probation, or any ankle monitor. It was the phone call he had to make to Patrick after watching his son field questions about his father's arrest at the height of the sports world. This chasm between the legal penalty the public decried as a joke and the private agony the family endured is why the documentary clips resonated so deeply. It's why they went viral. Viewers tuned in expecting to see a reaction to the court's decision. What they discovered instead was a father and son confronting a burden far older and heavier than one traffic stop on West Gentry Parkway. That so-called insane sentence was always a story with two sides. On the surface, it was a legal ruling that millions saw as a miscarriage of justice. But underneath, a much harsher family sentence had been running all along. It was years of private turmoil exploding into a national spectacle. A son forced to answer for his father's actions on the world's biggest athletic stage. And it was a grandfather on camera making a solemn promise to 3 grandchildren watching him from a luxury suite. As for whether that promise was kept, a 2026 arrest provides the unvarnished truth.